the conflict of interest also is there. Anyway,
not very liquid ever.
Not
the securitized vehicles are never very liquid. If you look at the AAA ones, those were the ones which are much more liquid. There's a lot of lack of transparency in this market. So I would dispute the fact that they were ever very liquid.
Well, I'm coming back to that. What failed and what didn't fail.
I would suggest that we have a Q&A.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I think the whole host of incentive problems were created by, which was primarily a consequence of securitization. Otherwise, it's a great innovation. If you imagine, and I should mention one more factor, that is, if you take the pooling idea, you are pooling, normally you would pick heterogeneous risks, and by pooling, your diversification effect is going to reduce the average risk. Now, if you break up the risk into two components, one is idiosyncratic risk, and the other is common risk. Now, if common risk meaning the risk that affects all the borrowers, not just in the same way, not just one borrower. So if you separate out the idiosyncratic risk, diversification works only with respect to idiosyncratic risks which are heterogeneous across borrowers. If the common risk cannot be diversified away. Now, if the common risk aspect of it came to dominate, then the risk reduction by diversification through the pools, that effect is reduced. But otherwise, that's a good idea. The other tranching is also a good idea. So that says even after reducing the average risk, you reallocate that reduced average risk according to the capacity to bear risk. So those who have the least capacity to bear risk, going by the AAA agencies, they will invest in the highly liquid, the low return form of the AAA rated securities, and those who have a much greater capacity to bear risk, they will take the bottommost tranches, etc. So this idea of risk reduction, average risk reduction, and risk shifting was a beneficial innovation. But given the incentive problems that screwed up the whole thing, I'm told the rating agencies in doing their rating, they didn't even allow for the possibilities that housing prices may go down. If this is correct, it's criminal negligence. It is not anything, you can't call it anything else. If you are rating a security, then you should be looking at the relevant the probabilities of the performance of that security in the future if you are going to do a proper rating. And if you are going to ignore one part of the distribution completely, which is less than zero, that is going down, then you are not doing your job. You are criminally negligent by not doing that. Anyway, that's my story about the spread. What it started as a real estate housing crisis, because of the securitization, and the securities were distributed, held by a whole range of people, including banks, etc. It spread to the financial sector, and with the globalization in the financial dimension, integration in the financial dimension, that spread to the rest of the world. Then back to the real sector, that you can easily imagine once your net worth is being wiped out, your consumption demand is going to be affected, and so on and so forth. It's a standard usual channel how to spread to real sector can be seen. Now, okay. So how many more minutes can I take?
Actually about 12 or 13 minutes, but you can take some.
No, I'll try to and talk too much, as always. Now, I already mentioned Governor Reddy's speech and the reasons he gave, And again, I have already talked about Rao's speech, and Rao rightly debunked the decoupling fad. It should be called fad, nothing else. Then there is this notion that the Chinas and Indias of the world have decoupled themselves of the global the economy to the extent that what happens in the global economy no longer drives their growth, and their growth is going to drive the global economy. That idiotic notion was debunked by by many people, including Mr. Rao. And the reduction, he recognized that the FII investments in the Indian equity markets will affect equity markets. And then reduction in foreign credit to domestic corporates affects the exchange rates, because if they borrowed from the abroad and they have engaged in hedging operations in the Asian markets, and so that once that source dries up, there is a chain reaction in number of the markets, including foreign exchange markets. So the exchange rates are affected, and the real channel through reduction in export growth. But Rao claimed at that time, since we are only exporting 25% of our GDP, this channel is going to be modest. Now, as I mentioned, he emphasized the financial integration much more than the real integration. The impacts we already know. Now, I would argue that the Indian economy experienced a growth slowdown. It's not a recession in the classic sense of the GDP declining. It is a GDP growth declining. Now, this GDP growth decline has begun earlier than the financial crisis in the world, and so it shouldn't be associated, part of the growth reduction should not be associated with the financial crisis. My argument is that the 9% rate of growth Indian economy experienced for 3 years, ending in 2006-07, was unsustainable, given the constraints, real supply constraints in the economy, particularly infrastructure, institutional constraints, and so on. So that was already being reflected in the growth slowdown, and that would have happened regardless of whether or not there was a financial crisis. So that's one point. The other thing is growth of industry and manufacturing. There again, there is an impact. Now the industrial growth has come down. Manufacturing growth has come down significantly but once again, we don't have up-to-date data. We have this industrial production data for the month of February. I think the latest is February 2009. But the GDP data we have only for the third quarter of 2008-2009. So up-to-date data to see what is the evolving impact is difficult in the Indian case. The policy response has been by way of this usual things. One, the monetary factors, the policy interest rates being reduced, and quantitative easing measures of various kinds have been undertaken, and the stimulus package of a modest kind was introduced, and it is being talked about, another stimulus being talked about. My view is that this thinking about the policy response as if it is a Keynesian aggregate demand, aggregate demand shock, and trying to boost aggregate demand is fundamentally misconceived in the Indian context. If I'm right on saying that the supply constraints are the major issues, and in particular the export growth, demand growth decline has led to a growth impact on the Indian economy.